I was asked to say something about fostering diversity in higher education. And what I've chosen to do is blend that into a session that's not so obvious, because for me, diversity of thought and diversity of people are very much the future for every service that we lead. And so with your permission, I'm going to be doing something slightly different. I have been asked to remind you that you've got a hashtag for this event, and that contrary to the thinking that librarians are quiet and people who don't have much to say, that those of you, how many of you are on Twitter? Okay, so those of you who are on Twitter, to make the hashtag live today, I've posted a tweet that said people should stop thinking of you as being invisible. Yeah, you're very much part of the change process. So I'm hoping that we can start a conversation on Twitter. I wanted to start, though, with a very personal view. You could tell instantly as I stood here, and actually I've been here only for a couple of hours, but I feel at home because I was with folk from my country. So as I stand here, you know immediately that I'm Scottish. And we're the 10 people that I was just working with in the same group. They didn't know as they were saying where they came from, Highlands and Islands, and Glasgow and Edinburgh, that actually you have a Scottish person here in front of you. And that's not always immediately apparent to people, and I'm very worried about that. The second thing that I always get told is I must be American. And although I have nothing against America, I'm not American, yeah, but I was schooled in Canada. And the pictures you can see behind you are, for me, I've been lucky. I'm a product of a set of parents who decided to take me around the world to educate me. And so the first library at the top is the University of Guyana, which was a British colony. That was their library. I spent quite a lot of time there. Not a lot of facilities like you find in other libraries, but quite a lot, enough for someone who was curious about books, as I am. The second library is, I was fortunate, my first degree is in Arabic and Middle Eastern Studies, and I spent time at Al-Azhar University and the University of Cairo many years ago. And usually all of my adventures ended up in the library. And the third is the Institute of Education Library, which is where I managed my master's after juggling various things, and I have a master's in museology and artifacts and objects. And that's because I decided very early on in my leadership work that there'd come a time when I didn't have the energy or shouldn't be standing in front of a group of people like this, and that I should go back to my first passion, which is museology. And so actually, for me, the role that libraries and people like you and people in public libraries have played in my life is immense. And so I was very pleased to be asked to come and speak here. Leadership matters. Now, my first speaking engagement after the Vice Chancellors was at the SDF's conference, which is where the Staff Development Forum for Higher Education meet. And it was on the day that America had changed its president. So literally on that night, I had made slides, and there were 2 other pictures on these slides. And, well, actually, there was only 1 picture on that first slide. And then quickly on my way into the conference, I had to change my pictures, and I had to change my talk. Because I really came from the land of the possibility that this could not happen. But of course, it's happened. On June 8th, we will choose. I think the choice is largely known. However, no matter who we choose, the issues for us are not going to go away. And part of why leadership really matters now, it's never been more important, is because the context we're operating in has shifted so much. You will know this and can read quicker than I can say it behind my head. But the time from when we believed this and where we are now in terms of the library's place has shifted hugely. The HE bill is kind of bringing change to all of us, and all of the organizations that you represent here are facing the challenges that come from that bill, as imperfect as it may be. That's the bill that's determining the future. Yeah? We're not immune to that. I'm from an organization which we ourselves are undergoing a change process. That means that at the end of a period of time, yet to be determined, we will be working in a new world. I think Brexit and the relationship between Brexit and higher education institutions and colleges are really important, and a really important aspect of diversity to grasp. One of the first programs that we've managed to create new for the higher education community is one that takes them to look at the relationship between HEIs and politicians. And we created a program called Power Brokers, which was really interesting because one of the first things that leaders could do on Power Brokers was sit through a select committee and watch when professors or academics were put on what we call the spike in politics, how they have to answer those questions, as we all have to as leaders. It's very interesting to me that a country like Australia, higher education accounts for 30% of its gross domestic product. And so it's very high up the political agenda. In the United Kingdom, our universities aren't yet seen as having that high priority. And it's interesting to look at the key battles on which elections tend to pivot, tend to be the world I came from, which was health. And no one wanted that portfolio. And higher education has such a huge role to play in determining the kind of future we will have in this country post-Brexit. So one of the people that I've been fortunate to work with and is a friend of mine has the best job in the world. He's a futurist. And we've been doing quite a lot of work on mapping how the forces of the future will affect healthcare. And now that I'm in higher education, we've begun the journey of looking at what that looks like for higher education. And under the first of these forces, demographic change, sits the title of the talk that I was asked to talk about today with you, which is diversity. However, if you look at thought leadership, there'll be a number of different models operating here in this room. Yeah. We're asked consistently to look at the demographic balance of the workforce that we're providing for the future in every sector. And I guess one of the questions is, in the session I was in before Sconul, we're looking at what do the leaders of the future look like, where are they coming from? It's really important that we look at that now if you want to have anything that's different to meet the challenges that are coming. So we know the well-rehearsed discussions in the UK about what demographic change means for the United Kingdom. We have an aging population. When I first played a scenario like this with a group of vice-chancellors, one of the things that we're looking at is there's a huge opportunity for looking at things like the university of the third age more formally. People will have are living longer. We have an aging population, yes, but people are living longer, and people want to participate in higher education in a different way than we've ever seen before. We know that power is shifting eastwards even as I speak. And we know that we're living in a more globally connected world, as I can say something here, and in 140 characters it can go somewhere else, or a representation of it can go somewhere else. And we know that global connectivity is something that really impacts the world that you comes from. Sustainability is one of the things that we really need to look at, and resilience in terms of a leadership quality is going to be really important. And then when we come to looking a little bit closer, as we will, on why diversity is important when we look at green technology, and one of the hypotheses or scenarios I played with was actually if you were looking at one of the colleagues in the future team being a robot, as it's happening now in Japan, then actually that takes diversity in a whole other direction. Yeah? And then, of course, there's the anxiety caused by all of these forces that we're consistently told will change things. Library spaces are diverse in appearance, and you can see some fantastic spaces, and you'll know more of these and have been in more of them than I have, but I'm continuously drawn to the architecture and the reappropriation of spaces in libraries. This Black Diamond extension to the historic Royal Danish Library in Copenhagen is fantastic, and one of our top programs, the Top Management Program, will now have as part of its International Week an exploration of things other than higher education, like libraries within higher education and other industries to look at to see what will stimulate leaders to do things differently. Our student experience survey consistently shows that in terms of learning resources, the boards or your higher education VCs and top teams should really not ignore learning resources in libraries. Yeah. So really, you should be knocking on an open door. Time has more than come from what we're calling the third space voices to be heard. Yeah. This is the time, because often you straddle that academic, non-academic divide in a way, along with some other professionals who are not here, in a way that can bring change more rapidly to the organization that you're part of. So we know genetic prophecy, robots in caring and roles. I mean, one of the blogs that Richard wrote was about a robotic librarian, a robot being a librarian. But you'll see why we don't really fully say that that can ever be a substitute for anyone here or anyone else in your team in a while. But we know that new nano-sensing properties are developing all of the time. There are books now, and you will know more about this than I can tell you, that read you as you read them. And that's fantastically interesting. But who will be the people that help people understand that where graduates used to read for a degree, now they can read 3 times as fast as the person standing in front of them teaching them. So actually, what do we do by way of learning now? This document was something that fascinated me as a child. It fascinated me when I was in Egypt. And it fascinated me in healthcare because I could say to doctors, here is the evidence, here is the evidence that evidence-based decision-making was always important. Yeah? But what's more fantastic is that you can now access this document and roll over it line by line remotely, not even having to be in New York where it's kept, where the archivists and the librarians have made it accessible in a different way. So in just the span of my lifetime, I've seen massive change. And what's going to come is going to be even more remarkable, and you're part of that future. I do believe that unlearning and relearning is the way forward. And when I was listening to the session that I was privileged to be in before, there's something around the culture that sits around people in your profession. People make assumptions that they know things about you that are simply not true. Yeah? I believe, and it'd be hard for you to believe this as I stand here speaking to a room of nearly 150 people, that introverts do have a space in the world. Yeah? And I am not an extrovert, but my job requires me to be able to give a level of extroversion. You wouldn't feel very up about me standing here going, I can't really talk to you. Yeah? So I have to find a level of being able to talk to you. I believe that you have the ability to change things, and I've believed that for a very long time. I think the readiness for change mindset is this time. Yeah? I think this is the time for people to stop making assumptions about people and colleagues they've sat around them and been part of, and start inviting them up to the top table where they can be part of strategic change. And I know more of you are going to be asked and invited, or probably strongly suggested, that you take on different parts of the organization. And part of the reason for that is because people know you have a set of skills that, whilst those of us who worked in intelligence for a while know might be staying hidden, are actually skills that make change happen more rapidly. So when it comes to considering diversity, you are the experts, really. You've already done the diagnosis. You can look around and see what's happening. You can see where people are not represented, and you can see that you don't look like your student population in some places at all. One of the programs that we run at the LF is the Aurora program, Women in a Leadership Role. And it's never failed to surprise me, just like it didn't in nursing, that although you have professions that are largely one gender, you'll have more of that gender in the room, they seem not to rise to the top in leadership roles. And so there's a question there for us to answer for people who don't look like us. Yeah? If we don't mirror the society that we serve, then people start to think that we're not of them, that we're not relevant to them. And I know that that's something that's exercised a lot of people. I think there's some questions here for you to not do now, but to take away and think about. I think succession planning and investing in developing diverse talent is something that you should be considering now. And I think there are 2 things for you in terms of higher education leaders and the body that you represent here as Sconul, in terms of what can you learn from other sectors and other leaders, but also what can you teach them. And I think it's what can you teach others that's been far too long hidden. Yeah? This so-called third space, it's interesting because I was like, I know third space theory, I get third space theory, I work for charitable organizations, I understand the power of what charities do in the United Kingdom and how they augment services. But third space, when it comes to defining you as a group of leaders, is slightly different. And I think this diagram, in terms of looking at students' world, curricula, first space, second space, third space, is a really important space. And there are many definitions of how you would use this theory, but this is one that I think has more relevance because, surprise, surprise, our institutions only exist to serve students, just like health institutions only exist to serve patients. And if we don't really put them at the center, which is what I believe you do beautifully as a collaboration of people in this room, then actually higher education institutions will cease to be relevant. And that's a fact that's coming home to us now as we're seeing falling student numbers. Yeah. So this is the provocation that I'm going to ask you to spend a few minutes just on your table, 3 minutes, and I'll stop you. There's some paper on your table. And I just want you to write down in 3 minutes what you think you, as a group of people, how you would answer this question. So the question is, what professional skills and attitudes will everyone in colleges and university libraries be demonstrating in 2030? Yeah, so we're in 2030. In order to be successful in the alternative future in which you might be operating. And we know that future is already here. Yeah? So if I can ask you on the tables that you are to just grab a piece of paper and answer that question in any way you want, and in 3 minutes' time I will stop you and I will finish the presentation that I've brought for you. Is that okay? Thank you. So I think in terms of you, as I'm now conveying this title of library futurist, yeah, and there's going to be a few new jobs in the last few slides for you to hold on to for your CV descriptions. Is the new technology radically changing attitude to time-honored values relating to things like copyright, trust, and community of learning? Because for me, those three values loom large in all libraries and librarians and professionals associated with libraries. So there's something about, is what's coming next really challenging the value set? And where do we go with that? There's something, so I'm not going to ask you to do that because we don't have that kind of time today. But this was the map that we made when we ran that exercise for a longer period of time. And I'm going to send you this so that you'll have it. And this was with 40 vice chancellors, and we were asking them to look at, in the future, we took them 10 years out only, we were being very modest. We didn't dream of 30, we just went 10, and that was difficult enough. One of the things that came up for them in terms of their burning question was their lack of impact with politics. Like they couldn't influence politicians. And they heard from politicians that they needed locally to be much more vocal. For me, there's a project that's going on that was started in health that's also being taken up in higher education. Wherever there's a university in a locality and a hospital, those are spaces of leadership. And one of the things of the future is you're going to be taking on a much bigger leadership role in your community as a university, and that has an implication for you, for everyone. I think these 7 strategic domains are going to be really important things to measure your leadership against going forward. And again, you're going to get a version of these slides that you can keep because the one that has Google pictures, you're not allowed to keep. Here is this nearly at the end, really. I think human empathy will be the most significant quality and it will never be replaced by a robot. I was in Japan where they were looking at optimizing a robot's touch by putting skin on steel. But it's not the same thing. There's no replicable thing that gives you human touch or eye contact. That will not go away. Libraries and library colleagues celebrate creativity. They always have. You've always encouraged people. You've always encouraged people to explore and discover things and to help people work in a way that made them engaged and empowered them to be individuals. My librarian was the first person I took my bind thesis to because I knew she was going to be putting it into the library. And she was the one that had sweated with me on weekends and evenings to get it done. You'll have new job roles in the future. You will be curators of culture and intellectual heritage. That will be your new job description. and that will trump many things. Forgers and renewers of identity, and something that I really like, excellence accelerators. When I think of library professionals, I think of an excellence accelerator. You make people better. You make people think better. And you'll need to be resilient in the world, and you'll work collectively. This command and control leadership that you find when you experience leadership from colleagues that you sit with now, who come from academic and non-academic professional roles, that combative nature, that competitiveness, the time for that leadership is coming to an end. This is the era of collective leadership, and you're eminently suited for that. That doesn't mean you can't stand up and be heard. It means your voices need to be amplified. How information is delivered still influences the message, and in some instances, it's more meaningful than the message. And you absolutely are central to that. And I believe, like Richard says, ongoing digitalization of culture will lead to ever greater integration of cultural institutions, and you're at the heart of that. So to conclude, Muhammad Yunus, who is someone that you may well know, said that, like Walt Disney said, but I think Muhammad Yunus said it for many different reasons, that if you want something to change, you first have to imagine that to make it happen. His goal was to have a world in which people didn't go hungry. And you can look up the Grameen Bank and see how that microcredit movement, by giving $15 to a woman, changed the lives of villages around the world. And the bank is the only one that has a 98% return in terms of people repaying loans in the world. So that's the thought I want to leave you with before we hear from your two colleagues. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks again for having me.